if you have a disease, they will probably find it eventually. Yeah. If your leg falls off, they will sew it back on for you, and usually successfully. Now, but what they suck at, I think, is if they can't diagnose the disease. If there's not a diagnostic, if you have candida or food sensitivities or, like some kind of heavy metal toxicity.
This is an episode I'm really excited to be sharing with you today, because when it comes to what really matters for you to be able to get into the body that you want, Dr. Bryan Walsh does one of the best jobs that I find, and I've been obsessed for the past few months of soaking up everything I possibly can of his. Hi, I'm Chris Dufay and you're watching Breaking Success. This is the show that gives you the answers for you to build the body, the business and the life that you love. In this episode, we talk about mitochondria, but we really dive into what really matters when it comes into you getting in great shape and why your health should come first. Because especially if you're struggling to lose weight, there could be some health factors, there could be your roadblocks and how you can quickly get around them as well. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you after soaking in this episode. Bryan Walsh, thank you so much for coming onto the My Body Learns podcast. I'm pumped to have you here because, just as I was saying before we hit record, I've been creeping your stuff out for a very long time now, and I think everything you're producing is really, really high quality. So I just want to personally say a huge thank you for producing everything that you do. I'm pumped to have you here, and thank you so much for taking the time out for this.
Well, listen, man, I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate that. Thanks.
All right, before we start diving into everything, because I've got pages of stuff from what I've written down from soaking in from yourself. Who is Bryan Walsh and why are you so phenomenal?
No idea. I don't know. The phenomenal thing I can definitely disagree with you on. I guess I'll give you the short version if I can. I've always been interested in the human body. I remember I was really young. And I was so young that I had to ask my mom to order it was a nutrition book through the mail. It was like on human nutrition. I was probably like 12 years old. Yeah. And I don't know where the interest came from, but I've always been interested in health and nutrition. I can't always say I've been healthy, but I've always been interested in how the body works. And then that led to, I started out as a fitness professional, that I was really into exercise, really into fitness, loved working out, of course, loved reading about nutrition, became a fitness professional and thought was okay, but I was really I wanted to really help people, so I didn't just work them out, but I was into orthopedics and I was into, back pain and knee pain. So then I became a massage therapist and was kind of using both of those together so I could put my hands and really try to help my clients. And as you know, they all had questions about nutrition and supplements and, should I be taking this or that? And while I was really well versed in those topics, I felt like it was outside of my scope, that legally, I personally, I don't, everybody has their own opinions on this, that legally here in the States, I felt, I don't know, I might have been crossing some boundaries that I wasn't technically able to do. And that's a gray area, I'll be honest.
Totally.
So I became a naturopathic physician, which is essentially a doctor of natural medicine. Mm-hmm. And what really attracted me to that was that it was the umbrella for which I could do all these things. If I wanted to still train clients or patients, I could do nutrition. We learned about herbs and homeopathy. We learned chiropractic adjustments. We learned acupuncture. We learned even some traditional like physical therapy modalities, ultrasound, all these different things. So that to me seemed like the pinnacle of which I could do all these things legally and safely. And so that was my path. I can tell you that where I exist now is the opinion. I think it's a realization, but it's the opinion that conventional medicine, though many people in our industry like to bash it, actually does some things really, really well, phenomenally well, better than we do. We owe what we understand about the human body to Western science, to conventional medicine and how things work. Where they shine is in that, and also in looking for the bad stuff, man. I mean, they look for cancer. They look for, if you have a disease, they will probably find it eventually. Yeah. If your leg falls off, they will sew it back on for you, and usually successfully. Now, but what they suck at, I think, is if they can't diagnose the disease. If there's not a diagnostic, if you have candida or food sensitivities or, like some kind of heavy metal toxicity or low cortisol that's not Addison's disease, and they don't have an explanation for that. Leaky gut, they don't even consider these things, even though the science is out there. So in alternative medicine, whatever you want to call it, alternative, integrative, functional, nutritional medicine, what we're really good at is finding those things. We're really good at, finding leaky gut and identifying food sensitivities and, even getting into some mental emotional stuff with people potentially and seeing that link. What I think as an industry that we're not very good at is appreciating the science more than we do. Though some do, and I can't. There's some brilliant people in our space for sure. But then we miss the big stuff, that we will run an organic acid test or a leaky gut test or a candida test, but we won't run a blood chemistry, and we're going to miss diabetes, and we're going to miss frank hypothyroidism or liver dysfunction or electrolyte insufficiency or something because we are so into food sensitivities. You have to run the food sensitivity test, and that's where I think that we fail, is we don't give enough respect to old-fashioned tests like blood chemistry tests, to conditions that we may be missing by just jumping to that cool stuff that we all learn about. So where I exist now is I try to bridge those two things together, the respect for conventional medicine and the science and looking for the bad stuff, but knowing that if it's not diagnosable, that there may be something else, and to consider the healing power of the body and the wisdom of the body, and that just because we can't test it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, which is where integrative medicine kind of excels in. So that's kind of who I am and where I exist, at least today.
No, I absolutely love it. And I think I just wish I had met you 10 years, 12 years before, because it would have saved me a lot of heartache. Like, say, very similar for myself, becoming a personal trainer, being so interested in it. Then I got really down into the nutrition route. But then it was also I wanted to study sports massage, which then got me my active release technique certification, and then studying functional medicine, like functional diagnostic nutrition. And I found the same. I was like, say, for instance, with the active release technique, with the massage therapy work, I was like, I'm trying to do stuff above my pay grade. I would much rather go to a client come to me and be like, okay, I can do this spectrum of work, but anything outside of this, then I have to go through. And especially, say, with the blood testing, first learning organic acids and running those, it'd be okay, fantastic. But then the interpretation of those lab results is the most important part of that as well. So I absolutely love this.
Well, no, man, and I think that's good. You mentioned FDN. I know Reed, and we go way back, and I know what he teaches and stuff. And listen, those running endocrine tests are cool. I mean, and running some of these tests that they run are awesome. But I will tell you what, man, if you don't have a blood chemistry, glucose dysregulation, that's a huge topic just by itself. The various types and what causes it. Those types of things, or just so many things that can show up on a blood chemistry test. And that's a perfect example. What Reed's doing and FDN is doing is fantastic. There's no doubt about it. But how many people are going to those types of practitioners that here's the thing is we're not blending those two industries together better. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to teach the sciences to guys like yourself who have taken ART and taken all these cool things, but you never learned the biochemistry, you never learned the physiology, so that you couldn't question these people that are teaching you these things, that you just have to take it at face value. And when they teach about adrenal fatigue, you're like, oh, it's adrenal fatigue. I'm going to tell my patients about adrenal fatigue. I'm going to, and so I'm trying to, that's what I'm very serious about this, actually. I'm trying to take the benefits of conventional medicine and the wisdom of conventional medicine, quite honestly, and there's a lot of wisdom there, with what we're doing, and trying to combine those two, because we're really, if we totally discount what they're doing and they discount what we're doing, we both suffer, but then patients really suffer the most. So.
No, I love what you're doing, and look, to tell you the truth, I think there's a huge need for it, because I will say 100%, as you said, if I don't know why something is happening and I can't question it, then I don't truly understand it, and I can't truly apply that to where it needs to be able to go as well. And that's where you get a real dogma happening in the industry, where you've got people saying, I learned this, so therefore like this hammer, therefore everything's a nail, and they just try and nail everything. It doesn't work that way. Okay, we could go on for days with this. I absolutely love it. Now, I love everything on the topic of mitochondrial health at the moment, especially for the world of physique, body composition, fat loss, muscle gain, all these kind of things. I would love for you to be able to sum up for the listener, Brian, what mitochondrial health is, and then we can start to talk about the actual importance of this when it comes to body composition.
Yeah, so and that what you just asked is a perfect example. To talk about mitochondrial health first then presupposes what the mitochondria even is in the first place.
Yes.
That's my to know what a thing is, then you can know what dysfunction or health means, and then you can identify it and regulate it. So the mitochondria, I hate these phrases that people say, like you say, what's the mitochondria? And everybody says the powerhouse of the cell. But that doesn't mean anything. Yeah. Like, what does it mean to be the powerhouse of the cell? Well, it makes energy. So the mitochondria, first of all, genetically, we get our mitochondria from our mom. Like, pure and simple. That's just what it is. And so if your mom was kind of a tired person and had poor mitochondria, then that could honestly explain where yours came from. Evolutionarily, there's really strong evidence that they come from bacteria. That these are these little like energy-producing bacteria within our cells in a way. They have their own DNA and RNA, which is pretty awesome. We're learning more and more about these little guys. But when they're called the powerhouse of the cell is because they are ultimately responsible for the largest production of ATP within cells. And ATP, of course, you can say it's adenosine triphosphate, but it's the currency of, it's the electricity of the cell that runs the show, is the best way to possibly say it. So, but then the big question is ATP to do what? I mean, to say it's the powerhouse of the cell and it's making all this energy is fantastic, but why have ATP? Yeah. And then people usually start, they're like, well, it's energy. Now, this is what's important. A mitochondria of a cell is to provide the energy for the functions of that specific cell. So if you have a mitochondria in a neuron, the mitochondria makes the ATP for that neuron to be able to fire and function as a neuron. If it's in a muscle cell, exercise physiology and skeletal muscle physiology, that the mitochondria inside of skeletal muscles is to provide the ATP, the currency for the actin and myosin to be able to release and ratchet itself to contract. If it's in a parietal cells make hydrochloric acid. It provides the energy to make hydrochloric acid. So the question then is, and this is what's interesting, is ATP provides energy for its given cell to do what that cell does. Now, if in your room right now, it looks like it's a beautiful day, so it's different than mine. If I'm running, it's pitch black outside, so this is all. If I had half the electricity in my room right now, I would only be able to see essentially like half the stuff. Yes. So if a mitochondria is only working half as well as it should, you only have half the ATP to do the functions of that cell. That cell can only work at half capacity, which makes, if that makes sense, then if you combine that one cell with all the cells of an organ or an organ system or the body, you can very quickly see that mitochondrial dysfunction can cause systemic dysfunction, because that ATP is used to run for that cell to do what that cell does. And again, if you have half the electricity going to a room or a computer, how well would your computer run if it had half the amount of power going to it? It wouldn't. You could get half the activities done, right? Yes. So that speaks to the importance of mitochondrial health in the first place. The processes that it uses, people, if they've had, at least like high school level biology, the old one is the Krebs cycle, more commonly known as the citric acid cycle now. There's another really important one called electron transport chain. Beta oxidation, which people have probably heard about, beta oxidation turning fat cells into ATP, not fat cells, but fatty acids into ATP. That occurs inside the mitochondria. Most people don't know this, the mitochondria is where all steroid hormones, the first step begins. So if you remember from FDN, your steroidogenesis pathway, all steroid hormones come from cholesterol. Yep. The first step is to turn it into pregnenolone. That happens inside the mitochondria. That the mitochondria pulls, and they don't teach that, right? The mitochondria pulls cholesterol in. cholesterol, and it's called the rate limiting step, the most important and step to determine where cholesterol goes, turns into pregnenolone inside the mitochondria. The pregnenolone then leaves the mitochondria, goes into the endoplasmic reticulum, which is another organelle people probably heard about or remember. And then for cortisol, does a few things, comes back into the mitochondria, and then goes through one more change to turn into cortisol. So here's the point. If your mitochondria suck, you can't make cortisol. Yeah. And therefore, you can call that adrenal fatigue if you want, but that's not fatigue. That's mitochondrial dysfunction causing low cortisol. Yeah. So the mitochondria are responsible for making energy, making ATP for all the cells that do what the cells in the body do, which is, like I said, if you consider if your car works at half capacity, how well will it run? It won't. If that is for all the cells of your body, your neurons, your skeletal muscle, just how important is this? Now to add this a little bit more to what you're talking about, how do I put this? The mitochondria are one of the most responsible pieces of a cell for metabolism, for your metabolic rate. Let's call it that. Your basal metabolic rate, I'll call it that. Your basal metabolic rate comes primarily from the ATP that the mitochondria are producing. Does that make sense? Yes. And so if you're talking about body composition, if you're talking about, lifting weights, whether it's for bodybuilding purposes and strength purposes, or power, which someone would say is a more neurological, not less skeletal muscle, more the motor units, whatever. But that's the thing. For the neurons to fire, you need proper mitochondria in the first place. Like, yes, bodybuilding is more skeletal muscle and powerlifting is more neural or neurological. Listen, neurons run by ATP. Skeletal muscle contracts by ATP. So they all need ATP. It's kind of like the fundamental thing that you have to be sure that everything else is working properly. And your metabolic rate comes largely from the ATP produced by the mitochondria, which then that speaks to, for body composition purposes, it speaks to the importance of proper mitochondrial health, proper ATP production.
I just had a question pop in my head, Brian. Does the actual, say, production of the amount of ATP that you're creating, does it work on a scale, or is there, say, like a minimum effective dose? Like, let's just say for your body to create hydrochloric acid, like if you weren't able to, say, if you were able to, only create half the amount, is it just half the amount of the hydrochloric acid that you're going to produce? Or is there
Yeah, that was more to illustrate that. It was kind of more of an oversimplification. Okay. It doesn't necessarily work that way. And to take it even further,
make it simple, but don't make it any simpler.
No. The body, it kind of has a triage effect where, let's say you were to be deficient in something like thiamine or vitamin B1. Yeah. There are every process in the body requires B1 in terms of the citric acid cycle. I'll just say it that way. But if you were becoming deficient in thiamine, you better bet that your body would be like, okay, of the thiamine we do have, what organs or processes do we absolutely still want thiamine? Like the heart would probably hold on to some thiamine, whereas maybe your left bicep would be like, we don't need this as much. So there's a triage effect. And so when it comes to, nutrients, and you were asking about 50% of, function, and it's not quite that simple, but I use it to illustrate the point of that energy production to do what that cell does. And therefore, if there's any deficiency in energy production to ATP, then cell function will decrease. And I forgot to add, if energy production suffers enough, you get what's called apoptosis or necrosis or cell death. If a cell does not have adequate amount of energy to do what that cell does, the body just says, well, you suck. I'm just going to get rid of you're dead weight. I'm just going to just kill you and recycle your stuff for other cells to use. Now, that's the importance of mitochondria.
Okay, this is fantastic. What would then cause mitochondrial dysfunction? And is that actually, before I go any further, because obviously getting the right answer determines if you're asking the right question. Is that the right question to ask?
Yeah. So here's the deal. Conventional medicine is all over mitochondrial dysfunction. It is absolutely legitimate. From what I've seen, and you could argue numbers here, but it's estimated that as many as like 200 200 chronic diseases have mitochondrial dysfunction as an element of it. Now, the big question is it causative?
Yeah.
In other words, does mitochondrial dysfunction cause these conditions?
Mm-hmm.
Do these conditions cause mitochondrial dysfunction, or are they merely associative, which means that you see this condition and you see mitochondrial dysfunction as well? And that's what they don't have the answer to, although there's some pretty compelling research on insulin resistance, being caused by mitochondrial dysfunction in the first place. Like, it precedes insulin resistance and diabetes, potentially. I certainly can't say that, but there are some very compelling studies that are suggesting that that's possible. You had mentioned adrenal fatigue earlier. Did mitochondrial dysfunction, as I just mentioned, will cause low cortisol if there's enough mitochondrial dysfunction, because that's where cortisol is made. It started and finished in the mitochondria. So yes, that's a totally right answer. Mitochondrial dysfunction is real. It's valid. It's accepted by conventional medicine. They're studying it and researching it, so it's totally legit. Now, as to what causes this, I will tell you that from a functional perspective, I think the two biggest causes are either or together nutrient deficiency and or excess reactive oxygen species, which is also known as free radicals or oxidative stress. That I wish I could show some like pictures of how this works. And it's really fascinating. So we've heard of oxidative stress or free radicals. And of course, they've had this horrible name and they're bad and they do all this damage. Well, it turns out that as with anything in the body, insulin, cortisol, water, that too little is bad and too much is bad, but there's this window that seems to be optimal. Same is true with ATP, by the way. You can have too much ATP. The body will shut down if it won't shut it down. If ATP production is sufficient, that's when it starts to store the food that you've eaten as glycogen or as fatty acids, for example, because it doesn't need anymore to make more ATP. So it says, let's store it for later. So you have a window of healthy ATP levels. You can have too much ATP. So we make as a natural byproduct of ATP production, we make free radicals. It's normal. Mm-hmm. It's expected. That's, the extra molecular oxygen ends up becoming a hydroxyl radical, hydrogen peroxide, another one called a superoxide radical, which is another. So these are free radicals. We make free radicals as a byproduct of ATP. It's kind of like a car when you consider it's using gas and it has some exhaust that it's blowing off. That free radicals are our exhaust. It's a consequence of making ATP. The beauty is that we have processes built in that we can make our own antioxidants to deal with these things. Mm. Now, if we are either, and this is what's interesting, making too many free radicals, which is possible, or we don't have enough, we're making a normal amount, but we don't have enough antioxidants, then what these free radicals or reactive oxygen species do, since they're mostly made inside the mitochondria, the mitochondria is making ATP, so it's also making free radicals. That's important to understand. So these little engines are making ATP, but they're also making oxidative. So what damage do you think these oxidative or free radicals are going to damage? Is the mitochondria. They're already in it, so they're going to damage this thing. So excess oxidative stress or normal oxidative stress but not enough antioxidants creates too many reactive oxygen species, and it's being made in the mitochondria, which the first thing it's going to be damaged is the mitochondria. So then what you get is damaged mitochondria. And without getting into the details of the permeability of the membranes and these different things, it doesn't work as well. And the mitochondria that doesn't work as well, and follow this, doesn't work well, makes less ATP, poor cell function, cell death. Yes. Done. Yeah. So that's one way mitochondrial dysfunction can cause and lead to certain diseases. The other one is nutrient deficiency. Now, when I say the word nutrient, what I'm really saying is vitamins and minerals, just collectively as nutrients. And the number of vitamins and minerals, which it's really sad to me because, you know what, vitamins and minerals just aren't sexy enough for our ADD society. That, what's sexy today is like goji berries and green coffee bean extract for glucose and like what antioxidant has the highest ORAC value. It's like well, blueberries have more antioxidant capacity, and they'll be like, well, then these little mini blueberries have even more than those blueberries. And at some point you got to be like, really? But vitamins, I'll just say this, if I was stranded on a desert island and I could have a bag full of goji berries or a bag full of multivitamins, I would take the multivitamins, man, because vitamins and minerals are necessary to run our cells. The processes, every biochemical pathway that you learn about, the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, all the biochemical pathways use nutrients, vitamins and minerals. Yes. If you don't, you can have all the goji berries you want, but if the goji berries are lacking certain vitamins and minerals, your cellular biochemical pathways will suffer. Yeah. Nutrients come first. They're not sexy, but they come first. So the number of nutrients, vitamins and minerals that are required for healthy mitochondrial function, ATP production, is kind of sick. Yeah. Like, you need vitamins B1, B2, B3, B5, lipoic acid, which your body can technically make. You need magnesium, you need iron, you need copper, you need CoQ10. You need in order to make the antioxidants work properly, you need, again, vitamin B2, you need selenium, you need copper, you need manganese, you need zinc. I mean, which one didn't I mention?
It's like when you look at those charts of how everything works and what's needed for each of the processes, it's just mind-blowing when you look at it.
Totally, man. And then things like vitamin E is an antioxidant for the membrane of the mitochondria. Vitamin C can act as an antioxidant also, and actually vitamin C is required for you to be able to use copper and iron properly. So the bigger question is which nutrients aren't required for proper mitochondrial function and ATP. So that all said, if somebody lacked iron, if somebody lacked copper, if somebody lacked any of those B vitamins, magnesium, then what would happen is that same process, that you couldn't make as much ATP, so then you get cellular dysfunction, and over time cellular death. And cellular death and if you get enough of that, then the organ stops working as properly. And then and then it shows up as a symptom. Like, what's your symptom, Mr. or Mrs. Client? Well, I'm having menopausal symptoms, or I'm having migraines, and I'm having this. What it really is cellular dysfunction in the first place. Every single condition is cellular dysfunction. That's all it is. Yeah. I don't know if we probably don't have time to get into this, but there's something that's called the levels of structural organization that is found in every chapter 1 of every single physiology textbook anywhere. Nobody ever spends enough time teaching this stuff when you take this class. But basically what it says is that we are on a smallest level made up of chemicals, atoms, and elements, like off the periodic chart. You put those together, you get a molecule, like an amino acid or glucose or a fatty acid. You put those together, you get a macromolecule, like glycogen or triglyceride or a phospholipid. You put those together, you get an organelle, like mitochondria, like endoplasmic reticulum. You put those together, then you get a cell. And that's the first time that this thing can sustain life. Organelles can't sustain life. A cell can. It's protected. It has a membrane. It communicates with other cells. It needs things. It essentially breathes in and it breathes out. It's life. Then you take cells and you can make tissues. And you're familiar, but tissues are like epithelial tissue, muscle, neural, and connective tissue. You take tissues together, you can make an organ. Like the stomach. The stomach has epithelial tissue. It contracts, so it has muscle. It's innervated, so it has neural tissue, and something holds it all together, so it has connective tissue, right? You take a bunch of organs that all have this similar function, like the esophagus, the stomach, the duodenum, the small intestine, the large intestine. Then you have a system, and that's like the respiratory system, the musculoskeletal system, the neural system. Then you put all the systems together, you have the organism, which is us, right? And so then a patient comes in and they say, I have this symptom, I have menopause. So you think, okay, which system is that? Yes. Well, it's probably the hormone, the endocrine system, right? It's not the whole endocrine system, because that's the thyroid and the pancreas and the liver, and everything is a hormone system. So it's not the system, it's probably an organ within there, right? So maybe it's in menopause, maybe it's the adrenal glands or ovaries, whatever. But then it's an organ. But an organ is made up of 4 tissues, right? So it's of that organ, Is it the dysfunctional connective tissue? Probably not. Is it dysfunctional muscle tissue? Probably not in the ovaries. Is it neural tissue? Maybe, but probably not. It's probably epithelial. So then what's epithelial tissue is just a bunch of cells. And what's a cell is a bunch of organelles. And so could it be that our job is to try to make the cells of our clients as healthy as possible, because a healthy cell means healthy tissues, means healthy organs, healthy organ system, healthy organism. And going back to that woman that has menopause or whatever it is, that's cell dysfunction. And then the question is, why is it cell dysfunction? Maybe it's nutrient deficiency. Maybe it's mitochondrial dysfunction. Maybe it's oxidative stress. And it does get more complicated than that. That's kind of an oversimplification. But there's also a lot of reality to that as well. So, what is I mean, if you were to say like ADD, you think nervous system. Well, it's not the whole system. It's probably more the brain. The brain's an organ made up of cells, and so it's probably a neuron, which is the cell. What can we do to support the cells? Make sure that they're getting the nutrients they need. Make sure that the hydration status is right. Make sure that there's not anything damaging to it, toxins or oxidative stress. And anyhow, so I feel like, and that's what I'm saying is, I feel like we miss that when we start getting into some of the cool stuff out there. But in reality, we have to make sure
you've got to understand the fundamentals, and you put that so brilliantly, putting that together, and
to make sure that we're doing that with our clients. So
yes.
Client comes in and you said the hammer and the nail. So I'm sure you have Lyme disease. We're going to find Lyme disease come hell or high water. And if the tests come back negative, be like, well, it's a stealth organism. It can hide. The test can come back. I'm still sure that you have Lyme. Yeah. But what about their nutrient sufficiency? What about their hydration? What about their pH? What about their oxidative stress? Which again, when you do the levels of organization, cells, tissues, organs, organ system, organism, every dysfunction really boils down to cellular dysfunction.
That just blew my mind. And it's exactly why I wanted to do this, why I especially want to talk to him. What I wrote down here was like putting the health back in fitness, because especially when I say, for instance, the example I see a lot of the time is when someone's dieting and training down to get really lean, a lot of the time what people fall over the end with is they start feeling really shitty. They're just falling apart. And a lot of the time it's because the actual nutrient deficiency is going on. They're not actually going through the processes that they need to, because they don't actually have that. And it's amazing, because what we look at is like adding back in those vitamins and minerals, and then suddenly they're actually being able to function properly on a day-to-day level as well.
Yeah, man. I wish I could pull it up right now. There was a study I came across, I'd say in the past 6 months, but it basically said that dieting seems to lead to PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. Yeah. And I mean, most of the time you think PCOS and overweight, chronically elevated glucose problems, they don't exercise and all this stuff. But this study was basically saying that hypocaloric diet, which leads to nutrient deficiency, was actually leading to causing PCOS in these people.
Wow.
So then, of course, I immediately went to the fitness industry. Yeah. I was like, good God, how many people are giving themselves PCOS, high testosterone in women? And I see high testosterone in the fitness industry quite a bit. But how many people are causing that in themselves because of this? And it could be as simple, I think, as just making sure that though it may be a hypocaloric diet, that it's just an absolutely nutrient-rich diet at the same time. So anyhow, no. It's worse. It's, putting the health back in fitness, man, because they're not synonymous. I think they used to be. I mean, when you look at the old bodybuilders, and even if they were using steroids, but even back in the day, I mean, they were probably a lot healthier than fitness people today are.
I on multiple different levels, I found the health and fitness industry to become extremely unhealthy. On the mental and psychological side, I've interviewed quite a few people. There was one interview I was doing with Dr. Vera Verman, and she at the end. 5 minutes in, I go, pretty much from what you're saying, 95% of the fitness industry has an eating disorder. She's like, yep. And I'm like, this is just out of control. And then when we start talking about on just a cellular level of what's going on, this is absolutely mind-blowing. So I tell you what, just to kind of like give the audience some real practical takeaways, maybe if we can just quickly step back and say, okay, we've got nutrient deficiencies, and we've got reactive oxygen species being the problems. What can we do about these two things now, Brian?
Well, the nutrient deficiency one is a huge pain, to be quite honest with you. There are very few ways of testing what our deficiency levels might be. I will tell you that, and I'm not going to name them, but there are tests out there to claim to measure nutrient levels. I find a couple of them highly skeptical or highly suspicious. I wouldn't waste my patients' money on them. The best that I know of, and this is because it's biochemically sound, is a urinary organic acid test. It does not look for all nutrient deficiencies. It's only, unfortunately, a kind of a small handful. But that, along with a blood chemistry, and a blood chemistry that doesn't look at nutrients, I have to say, that there are some indirect markers that can suggest certain deficiencies, is really the best that we have.
Okay.
Signs and symptoms of deficiencies is really tough as well. And so the best, and I don't have these programs. Someone needs to figure out a better way. But there are software programs out there now where somebody can enter in, 7 days of what they ate in detail. So quantity, quality of the different foods. And it will tell you where you are in the spectrum of everything: vitamins, minerals, amino acids, all the different types of fatty acids. And I will be honest with you, man, you can put in a really good diet and still be deficient in stuff. And that's not even speaking to the soil quality and whether it's it's
gut
in the
health,
soil
are you
enough,
actually absorbing and assimilating
it. If you are, how you're utilizing these, and then if you have excess excretion for some reason. Stress can increase our requirements. So the RDA, for example, the recommended dietary allowance, is a starting point, but by no means is optimal. And it doesn't account for biochemical individuality. It also doesn't account for differences in lifestyle. So, during summer months versus during winter months, do we have different requirements for certain nutrients? If we're exercising,
if we just have a baby, like what suddenly happens then? Because you're suddenly getting less sleep and everything starts going to hell and high water as well.
Oh, don't even talk to me about that. Yeah, no, I have. We just had our fifth. He's 2 months old.
Congratulations.
They're all under 8.
Brian.
Yeah,
right.
dude.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's
okay.
8, 6, 4, 2, and 2 months.
Oh, okay,
and
awesome.
So you talk about nutrient deficiencies and sleep.
All right. I tip my cap to you then. I've got a 3 and a 9-month-old. So you can. All right. Well, we can talk about that on another episode. Yeah. The daddy episode.
Keep having them, man. It keeps getting better the more you have.
Good.
Yeah. So, stress can increase our requirements. The type of exercise that we're doing and intensity of exercise that we're doing, that can increase our requirements. So, you ask about nutrient deficiency, and I'll be honest, I don't think there's anybody out there that can tell you quantitatively how much we all need. Because of that, I will say that one of the best things that somebody can do, and it doesn't sound like much, is to make sure that they're taking a good quality multivitamin, multimineral, at least to get some of the basics. In terms of oxidative stress, that's another one that one cannot say that everybody has excess oxidative stress. It's like saying that we're all inflamed or they're all too acidic, and those statements just simply aren't true. Yeah. There are tests that one can run to evaluate their levels of oxidative stress. Here in the States, there's a couple labs. Genova offers a couple tests that somebody can run. But again, a standard blood chemistry, when interpreted well, can point to oxidative stress. I can tell you the 3 markers specifically are uric acid, GGT, and bilirubin. Mm-hmm. And if bilirubin's, I think, one of the strongest ones. If bilirubin is below 0.4, at least that's the units we use here, it's a strong indication of oxidative stress. If GGT is on the high normal side, so I'd say above 30, 35, 40, at least again in standard U.S. units, that could be indicative of oxidative stress. And a kind of borderline low uric acid, which isn't as strong of a marker, but that could be oxidative stress as well. So That's the thing, is if I have low bilirubin and you don't, then I probably need to take some extra antioxidant support, whether through diet. If I'm not eating a good diet, if I am, then maybe I have some processes increasing oxidative stress and I need to take something. I need some, extra glutathione or some kind of antioxidant product. And you don't. If your bilirubin is fine, and you may not have excess oxidative stress, especially if you don't have any kind of symptoms.
If I can just jump in, Brian. So the step someone you think would take would be, say, start with a CBC, a comprehensive blood chemistry look at, and you come back and go, okay, maybe my bilirubin's off, and you go, okay, I'm not taking the right nutrients to be able to take that in. If you go back and take a CBC again, it's because you want to make sure that everything's coming back around. Now, if that doesn't come back around to the way that you want, is that when you would say go to the organic acids?
Organic acids can look at some oxidative stress markers. Yeah, no. Listen, man, that was beautifully said. That is the way that I typically do things. That a good comprehensive blood chemistry test always comes first. Yeah. In fact, we don't run anything else. If someone wants to run anything else, go for it. But that's the first test we always run.
That's the thing. Like it's one step at a time. You've got to be able to say, okay, and then if I do this, am I getting the result? If not, then what's causing? Because I feel like so many people let's do organic acids. Let's run a stool analysis. Let's just jump on the bandwagon and do anything. You're just
well. But you know what? I will say, if money isn't, because money is the biggest reason for someone not to run those. That's it. I mean, listen, if someone has the money and they want to spend $1,000 a test, go for it. I will look at every one of them. I think that's fantastic. Yes, but and of the tests, the most that you can get bang for your buck is a good blood chemistry test first and foremost. It's the most tried and true test out there. It's the most recognized, validated test worldwide. I could take my test from the States and go anywhere in the world as long as they could translate the language.
Yeah.
A doctor could interpret it. It's the most scientifically validated. Organic acid testing, believe it or not, has existed. Conventional medicine recognizes it. They don't use it the same way we do. That's another good test. And genetic testing is a big conversation I don't want to get into right now, but that can offer a lot of insight. As well. But you said it perfectly. If bilirubin's low, take some antioxidants. A couple months later, redo the blood test. If bilirubin doesn't come up, then at that point, you have a couple options. You could take more, but that doesn't make sense. Yeah. Look deeper into it to see what it is. Absolutely, without a doubt. That's perfect.
Beautiful. One last question. I know, I'm sorry, we've gone over time.
No.
The interpretation of the actual testing for the listeners right now, if they go do a CBC, how would you recommend them to go actually see someone, or who would you recommend for the actual interpretation? Because I've got a couple people that I would obviously recommend when clients get to that point, and for them to see it, then they can relay information back to myself, and then obviously the action plan can go forward. But obviously if someone's like, okay, I want to get this done, what do I do? Are they stuck in the mud?
No, not stuck. Just it's not easy. The short version is the laboratory reference range that's offered on the test. So anybody that's had a test can recognize that on the left-hand column has the marker. Yeah. In the middle is usually the patient's results. And then on the right-hand column is the reference range, which dictates whether that result is within the range, above or below. Now, I can go into as much detail as you want about this. But the reality is that the laboratory reference range is a bit wide. It's designed so if people can picture a bell-shaped curve. I'll say that people can picture a bell-shaped curve. The way that the laboratory reference range is derived from is, and this is true, is the labs collect the blood that they're being given. Yeah. They don't necessarily, for most markers, go out and try to find the healthy population. Yeah. The markers vary. And then what they do is, so they take so let's say we have a room full of 100 people. We take the blood of all those 100 people and we look at that one particular marker for all 100 people. Yeah. And we have a variety of numbers, a variety of results. Well, what they'll do is they'll take all those results and then they'll figure out the mean, the average. What's the average of all those 100 people? And then from that, they can create what's called plus or minus 2 standard deviations away from that mean. Okay. So let's say of these 100 people, of this marker, the average was, let's just say 80. I'm just making up 80. Plus or minus 2 standard deviations from that, if there's more calculations involved. But that might say that it's 75 is plus or minus 2 standard deviation below, and 85 is above. So that's the reference range. Okay. Now the problem is you don't know what that 100 people, if they were healthy or they're not. They don't know, if they're following a standard American diet or a bad diet or a good diet. You don't know if they're on medications or not. You don't know if they have disease, another disease or not, and it's really difficult to do. So I say all that because the laboratory reference range, it is not uncommon for people to go to the doctor to have a marker within the range, but they have symptoms, and the doctor says, well, you seem fine to me. All your markers are normal. But if you were to take 1 standard deviation away from the mean, then all of a sudden you have a tighter reference range. And that tighter reference range, if you're outside of that, does not mean disease. Doctors are looking to see, do you have a disease or do you not? Because if you have a disease, I can diagnose you and I can treat you. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a diagnosable disease, I can't treat you for anything. Mm-hmm. That's how the system works. And I'm not commenting on the system. That's just how it is, man. Yeah. So if it's outside of the lab range, then maybe you have something going on. But if you crunch those bookends in to plus or minus 1 standard deviation, then what you might have is, if you're outside of that range, it's saying your physiology is a little bit off, but you're not diseased. This is explaining your symptoms. And I cannot tell you how many lab tests I've seen where I will look at it, and this is how I typically work. I will try to tell the person how they're feeling and what symptoms they're experiencing by looking at the lab test before they tell me what they're experiencing, if that makes sense. To say, I wouldn't be surprised if you wake up every night. If you skip meals, you get shaky and lightheaded or irritable or whatever it might be. Your hair's falling out, you have dry skin, and you're feeling cold all the time. And they're like, oh my gosh, how do you know that? Their markers, and I will even say this, will be within the laboratory range still. But if you use a more optimal reference range, yes, then you can find out these physiological imbalances. So to answer your question, I don't know. There are practitioners out there that will critically look at a blood chemistry, assuming it has enough markers, with a more optimal reference range, and understanding physiology help to determine what's going on with that person. Finding those people, I think, is tough, but they're definitely out there, and they're definitely worldwide. I mean, there's people doing cool work, Australia, New Zealand, in Europe, here in the States, Canada, even Mexico. I mean, they're around. You just kind of have to search for them.
Because I remember doing my first lab analysis course with Dr. Mark Schaus, and I was just like, whoa, this is above my pay grade. And I did another one. I was like, okay, I have a very small understanding of what's going on right now. I have to refer out. This isn't just something you can you just got to refer out. And I think that's where finding the right person. I just don't want someone listening to be like, right, Brian, Chris, everything sounds fantastic. I'm going to go get this done. And then what? But that's a brilliant answer. Right. I really appreciate that. That was really good.
Well, no, and the short answer is to call around, to be an advocate for your own health, and to be a champion of you, and to call and say, does your doctor use the laboratory reference range for evaluating blood chemistries? Flat out. Yeah. No, I don't. Thank you very much. Hang up, call the next one. I mean, and keep calling, or look on the internet, or go onto forums and look on boards online or blogs or whatever. But people are out there. It's just a matter of finding them. And if you don't get answers for your health, there's usually an answer. And what it means is to try to keep going and keep trying to find that person that can try to give you that answer, because there usually is an answer.
Love that. Brian, I could talk to you for days on end, mate, and I really appreciate this. I think I'm just going to have to get you back on. We're going to do another one.
Sure.
I've written down more notes than I started with to kick it off with, so this has been brilliant. Now, where does the listener go right now to learn more about yourself and everything that you're doing?
Well, I got my website it sucks. I've done nothing to it. It's an improvement over my last one, I mean, I'll be honest with you, my wife is like, your website sucks. You have to do something new. I was like, well, I hate hiring people because it never turns out the way you want it to. It's such a pain in the butt. And so she did it. She's like, I'll throw something together for you. She did. And I don't touch it. I don't do anything. So it sucks. But anyways, it's just drwalsh.com, drwalsh.com. From there, I've done some courses that people can find out more about. I've done some videos on YouTube, but you could probably Google me on YouTube and find a couple things. And I'm technically on Facebook, but I never visit Facebook very often. So I kind of suck at the whole marketing thing. I'm usually busier trying to research or create products.
There's only so much you can do, and I think that's the thing. Like you are so in tune and such a brilliant mind when it comes to this. Like you can't. Your time is better spent doing what you're doing right now.
I enjoy reading research and making stuff. I love it. Teaching, I love it. And I hate Facebook. I'm not a very conversational person over Facebook.
It's perfectly fine. But I really appreciate it.
drwalsh.com is probably the best way, and I think with some creative searching online, they could find some videos or things they've probably done before.
Brilliant. I'm going to make sure that we link over to that into the show notes. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time out. I really appreciate this. You've blown my mind. I know you would have blown everyone that's tuning in as well. Have an awesome night, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you soon.
Ditto. Thanks, man.
Now, this is where I want to make sure that you get the most out of being here, and I want to hear from you. So if you've enjoyed this episode, click like, and to make sure I can send you the new episodes each and every week, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Also, I really want to make sure that I'm giving you exactly what you need. So comment below. I want to know what you're going to take away from this episode. And the best conversations after every episode always happen in the Breaking Success Tribe. I'll pop a link below for you to join the free group so you get access to the guides, the live streams. I'm in there answering your questions personally each and every day. Plus you get all the episodes as well. So thank you so much for being here and joining us. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.